Who knows what it's like to have a dream and then wonder if you're ever going to reach it? Who knows what it's like to have a dream that's held you through times you thought nothing would work? God gives us a big picture for a reason. And one of the reasons He gives us a big picture is that often things are going to happen that we're going to need things to hold on to. I remember being very young, living in Durban on church food parcels, and things were not going well, a lot of fighting at home. And someone scored me a ticket to the movie Cocktail. I think it's the first time I ever saw Tom Cruise. And I thought, what's the big deal? And the movie line sucks. I mean, it's just nowhere. But the beginning has a song by the Beach Boys, Kokomo. And I remember watching that as this aeroplane comes to land over this incredible water, this exotic island environment, and thinking what's going on at home, looking at that and saying, my future can't look like my present. It has to look different. And that movie will always stay with me, because in that moment I made a decision that says the present I'm living in is not going to be what my future looks like. It's a decision I made back then. You need a big picture. Peter writes like this in chapter 5, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you, casting all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. Isn't that encouraging when you think you're the only person ever going through what you're going through right now? You are so unique among 7 billion people on this planet at this point in time. And unlike the multi-billions who've already lived, you alone are going through that thing and no one understands you. It's the language of pity. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to His eternal glory in Christ, will Himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. Stop at 7. Only 3 more to go. Is this: stop taking your eyes off the big picture. Stop concentrating only on the waves in front of you. A great object lesson proving this point was the great financial crisis of 2008, when the stock markets around the world crashed, particularly in the United States of America. Leaders of companies found themselves in big issues because they had to try and find out how to keep the morale and motivation of their people on track during a very trying time. Some of the best paid, highest performers in the industry were bottoming out. Some were jumping off buildings. We've heard some of the stuff. Things were not good. Focus groups were employed to help employees, and one of the things they had to do, there were 3 purposes of these focus groups. The first thing they had to do when going into a company and trying to help the employees to calm down was that to find the ones who were doing well and keep them moving forward and keep on empowering them. The second thing they had to do was figure out why some were performing well and others not, and help those who weren't to perform like these. And the third task was to help turn around those who needed help. In the midst of doing this, they came to some conclusions, but one of the interesting and startling conclusions they came to was they said that in all these companies, there are 2 groups of people, basically: your thrivers and your strugglers. Thrivers, they discovered, were those who keep the big picture in mind. Strugglers are caught up only in what's happening in the moment of their lives. So on Wall Street, there was this huge difference between stock market executives, financial advisors, and interestingly, it was not based on previous success, because both lots were high performers. They were award winners. They were industry leaders. The big difference was this: some of them had been through market crashes before and others hadn't. The first group had age and experience on their side. The other group were experiencing catastrophe for the first time. The world as they knew it had changed. Things were hopeless. Things could not and would not ever be the same again. The good years had taught them there's a very simple formula for success. Do this, get that. What happens in your world when you do this and you no longer get that? When everything you've believed about your marriage, about your business, about yourself, that has always worked, suddenly doesn't. What do? Where do you go? Those who've never experienced this before crumbled. Those who had didn't. Why? Because age and experience taught them that the market is full of ups and downs, and usually there's a lot of downs. And those who'd been through it before knew they could get through it again. They had something to lean on. The ability to hold on to the big picture. Why? Because they saw this crisis as simply one scene in a much longer movie. They knew how to stay in the business. When the pressure's on, how do you stay in the business? Jesus gives us an example in John 15, verse 5. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Jesus, on the eve of the cross, was explaining to his disciples how to stay in the business, how to keep the big picture in mind. And one of the things he said to them was, abide in me. Where you are at right now, learn how to stay. The definition of the word abide, according to the Strong's Concordance, is it is a primary verb meaning to stay in a given place, state, relation, or expectancy. It means to continue, to dwell, to endure, to be present, to be held, to be kept continually. In other words, Jesus is saying the conditions for your fruitfulness are always there. In this church, in your life right now, the conditions to bear fruit, the conditions for the grapes to emerge out of your life are there. The question is, are you going to choose to stay in the place where you want to bear that fruit or not? Because you have to choose to abide, stay. You have to choose to be held, to be kept, so that this can happen. The thrivers who abided in what they were doing are those who saw the big picture and ultimately ended up successful. Were they smarter, more strategic? No. They simply looked at the horizon. A quick word of advice for those going through a marriage that's struggling. And others advise you go to a marriage counselor and you say, no, I don't think we need that. What are they going to do? As you discovered with the thrivers and the strugglers, those who had been there, those who had seen, those who have experienced things before, normally those with age and experience on their side. And sometimes when you're going through a financial, children, marriage, or whatever crisis it is, you often need to spend a bit of time with those who understand the big picture because they've been there. They know what it looks like. When your head's just above water and you're struggling and you can't see anything, you need those who can see the calm horizon of your future. Those who can speak into your life because they know, because they've been there. I'll tell you, that's why you go sit with a marriage counselor, or that's why before you marry, you know, got that little spark you want to marry. And you take that little spark to the pre-marriage course. And the people take a look at you and they take a look at this other person. And everyone around you, from family to friends, say, don't do it. But you know better. So you're going to do what you know because you know better. It's your life. And 6 months later, crisis. Can you help us, please? Why did they see it coming? Big picture people. They know what works and what doesn't work. Out of experience, you can sit with someone you're counseling and you know within 5 seconds whether they're actually going to change, adapt, be healed or not. Simply by what's going on here and how they choose to respond. When we look at the encouragement, the instruction given in the Bible, it becomes clear that God has wired our brains with the capacity to see long term and not just the moment. He wants us to see the movie, not just one scene. Read the whole book, not just a chapter. Eat the whole day. Don't just have a sandwich for lunch. When we see events that we're going through at any given time, as part of a longer story, our minds help us to understand in every different context, keep looking at the big picture. The moment isn't the only thing that's there. I mean, honestly, when Jesus was facing the cross, what kept him on that road? When he himself said, you know, I could call a legion of angels. He literally could violate the will of his Father, call a legion of angels to rescue him from that moment, because although he was fully man, he was fully God. But the Bible says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He looked big picture. If Jesus had succumbed, none of us would be sitting here right now. But he saw ahead. He saw not the moment, he saw the big picture. He saw eternity. People have said this, seeing the big picture does at least three things. Number one, it helps get us out of subjective present feelings of everything's bad. It lifts you into an objective narrative. Look at your life, what's been, what is, and what will be. Don't make final decisions based on the moment. Who hasn't walked into the boss's office, something's gone wrong, it's not even your fault, your boss tears a strip off you, and you in your pride says, well, I resign. Or you think it. And it's a very bad move in that moment, because there's probably 100 unemployed people looking for that job right now. And your little tiffy is not going to help anybody, especially you, in that very moment. You need to realize this is just an hour in my day. This is just a day in my week. This is just a week in my year. This is just a year of my life. I've had the worst year ever. Well, how old are you? 59. So you've had 58 good years. Oh, my marriage is a mess. Satan, whom I'm married to, has it always been like this? No, but since we had kids, how long you married? 15 years. How long you had kids? 3 months. Okay. Let's just help you see differently. Look at what's been, look at what is, look at what will be. Don't live in the moment. Because when your perspective changes, your emotions change. When your emotions change, the way you think changes. When the way you think changes, the way you act will change. Get a grip here. The Bible says guard your heart above all things. It doesn't say guard your mind above all things. Because when you're stuck in a moment where you need to react, your mind doesn't even think. You operate right from here. Think big picture. Secondly, firstly, it gets us out of subjective feelings. Secondly, it changes the moves you make. Think to yourself, is this going to help my future? I've been advised this on many an occasion, especially when I was younger and I had even less grip on my emotions than I do now. Was this, never make a decision in a bad mood. Do you know how many times stuff happened in church life that I got to hear about and I wanted to pick up the phone immediately and get hold of person X and say, come and see me, but I have one objective only, and that is to obliterate you. Who does that help? You know how many times I've had to sit on it and go to my room and pray in tongues and punch a door or two and then pray in tongues some more, then phone a repairman. And then, no, that's a lie. I've never, ever broken a door in my whole life. Okay, yeah. That's the truth. But the point is, how many times is it you had to say, hang on, big picture moment. Don't make a decision right now. Don't say that word, which we've all done, that the opposite party has an ability to retain because they're much greater than God. Because remember, God says, I take that thing, I throw it in the sea of forgetfulness. You and I, of course, are much greater than God. We hold on to it. We put it in our purses like a gun, waiting for the day when that ammo is needed again. And it usually starts with this, remember when you said. How many people haven't burned bridges unnecessarily? Because they've reacted at times because they did not see the big picture. Think of incidents of tragic road rage where you think, I was sitting at a function last night and someone said just that day or the day before they'd seen an incident with two people having a thing in their cars. And the one stopped from the other oak, got out with a bat and started to smack the oak in the car through the door, the window. And that guy then got out who was bigger than this one, who then started to fight back. And of course, being Joburg, the traffic just carried on going and left these two to their stories. I remember doing some evangelism, some witnessing here in Edenvale to holding cells one day on a Saturday morning. And a very well-dressed guy in loafers, smart clothes was brought in, and he was totally thrown. And I asked somebody, what's his case? He discovered last night his girlfriend was cheating on him. He went to his friend's house because he had house sat for his friend on a number of occasions, took his friend's gun, went to his girlfriend's house and shot and killed her. And then went and handed himself in at the SAPS. So within 2 or 3 hours, I'm standing across and they put this guy in isolation. Took his belt off, anything he could use to hang himself. And this young guy, probably early 30s, was sitting shaking, just dead to the world, just looking. Crime of passion. Losing the big picture in a moment. Keeping the big picture helps change the way you will respond. Thirdly, seeing the big picture helps you learn the lessons of the present. So what happened to the guys in Wall Street, the thrivers versus the strugglers, is if they knew one thing, they knew this: the value of money never changes. So the moment the stock market crashed and people started pulling their money out of bonds and putting it under their beds, these were the men, the old graybeards, who called these investors in and said, you've got to understand, great stock is going at rock bottom prices. I urge you to buy more now. And so what happened to the rich? They got richer. And they invested and they bought. And as things have now turned around again, there are some who made more money in that crash than they ever would in bad times, in good times. The big picture helps you learn lessons from the present. And they had had other present times where they'd learned what decisions to make for their future. Just remember, for thrivers, no one event is the whole story. What do you do in a big moment crisis? You learn how to keep the main thing the main thing. When something significant happens, your emotional state can change. You can go into flight or fright. It suddenly makes sense to book a holiday in Mauritius on that credit card of yours. You get angry, fearful, aggressive, anxious. You become consumed with self-loathing. Your emotions overtake your judgment, your motivation, and every other aspect of your functioning. Besides feeling negative, you know what flies out the window next? Your sense of hope. I don't believe this thing can change. You begin to experience the emotional reactions that people, or the clever people, the researchers, the psychologists call the 3 Ps of someone who's lost the big picture. They say it's called personal, pervasive, and permanent. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. Now, I won't obviously talk more about the stock exchange because I've made that picture. Something a bit more closer to home, the couple that faces trauma because the husband has a midlife crisis. So he leaves the home, leaves his wife. What's the first thing she can do? Take it personal. This external event causes her to make emotional conclusions about herself. What does she conclude? There's something wrong with me. The reason he's left is because there's something wrong with me. I make it personal, not a fault on his part. That personal response causes it to become pervasive. She believes if I'm not good enough for my husband, I'm probably not a good mother either. I'm not good in the workplace. I'm not a good friend. They start feeling negative about themselves. Why? Because their personal feelings of negativity has become pervasive. It starts to pervade everything. How does it then result? It becomes permanent. This is what my future is going to look like. How many times I've sat with a spouse who has said to me, I believe this is over, and I've had to tell them it's not. And they said, how do you know you're not in the mess I'm in? It's true. But I know enough to know this. God the Spirit can change anyone and anything. And you've got to learn to hold on in times when you don't even believe you can hold on. Why? Because I take it personally, it pervades, and now suddenly I believe this is permanent. You cannot draw conclusions on that. You have to allow those who've been there before to speak into your life. The future can look bleak. Hopelessness steps in. Loss of energy, depression, anxiety. Sometimes they act out of character and do things they'll regret. Other times they throw in the towel and withdraw into themselves. When you've seen that, you've got to help them see something else is needed. So if someone you know is facing this, if you're facing this right now, you've got to learn to keep the big picture in front of you. What do? Well, the first thing you've got to do is step back. You've got to realize this isn't your life. This is a scene of your life. This is one act in the play. There's another act to follow, guaranteed. Something else is going to happen. Tomorrow's coming. You're going to wake up and the same as you're living today and the decisions made yesterday, you can live tomorrow and the decisions made today. You've got to decide that. You've got to make a choice. You change the way you think, you can change your actions. The Bible helps us. Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, for what we proclaim is not ourselves. but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are persecuted, but not forsaken. We are struck down, but not destroyed. We're always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our mortal flesh. Now, the Message Bible helps make a little bit more sense of that. It started when God said, light up the darkness, and our lives filled up with light as we saw and understood God in the face of Christ, all bright and beautiful. For if you only look at us, you might well miss the brightness. We carry this precious message around in the unadorned clay pots of our ordinary lives. That's to prevent anyone from confusing God's incomparable power with us. As it is, there's not much chance of that. You know for yourselves that we're not much to look at. We've been surrounded, battered by troubles. We're not demoralized. We're not sure what to do, but we know God knows what to do. We've been spiritually terrorized, but God hasn't left our side. We've been thrown down, we haven't been broken. What they did to Jesus, they did to us. Trial, torture, mockery, murder. What Jesus did among them, he does in us. He lives. Our lives are a constant risk for Jesus' sake, which makes Jesus' life all the more evident in us. What's happening in that instant? Paul is describing to the Corinthians what it looks like when persecution hits your life and you've got to try to find meaning. You've got to try to find purpose with what's going on. What Paul was showing is what the clever people today, the psychologists, tell us. It's this: our brain is wired with the capacity to live out the big picture, to manage little pictures along the way. The way you've seen human beings who've gone through the most terrible trauma imaginable actually rebuild their lives afterwards. They're able to see the bigger picture. Think of those who survived the Russian, German, and Japanese prisoner of war camps in the Second World War. Look at those who went through horrors that you and I cannot begin to imagine. When your garbage hasn't been picked up for a week, your neighbors had a party last night, your car wouldn't start, and your pants no longer fit. You want to emigrate. I need another environment. We do not know what it means to go through what other people go through. How did they go through those traumatic times? I said there's a bigger picture here. This is a moment. And that's what Paul is showing us. In the midst of all we're going through and the battles and the things facing us, let's just get some step back. What is my life about? I'm simply an ordinary vessel meant to reflect and show and hold and contain the light of Christ. So how do I do that? That's what he's trying to say. If you do not keep the bigger picture in mind, the little picture incident starts to get into your mind. And little pictures will influence you. They'll influence you either, number one, to hoard, which means to hold, to contain, to keep. In other words, I've loved before. I've reached out before. I've opened my life before and I've been hurt. I'm not doing it again. I'm closing up. And that love God's given me, that capacity to forgive and be forgiven and walk generously, I'm not going to do it. I've been hurt. I'd rather not be hurt again. I hoard my feelings, my emotions, my life. The other one is I've watched someone else go through it and I'm not going to go through it. I didn't experience, but someone else did. And I'm not going to feel what they felt. When you're, as a human being, have been created with an incredible capacity to feel. You're like the person who's been given a new car or a new toy or a new something that's so precious you refuse to use it. So 20 years later, it becomes an ornament. But it was meant to be used. How many of you have been, come on the guys, you could buy this beautiful penknife. This knife is so nice, it's going in my cupboard. Then why did you buy it? It's to cut biltong. We all know that. So use it and cut the biltong. That new car, I remember going to my uncle's house one time, and we were going to go swim, and he wouldn't let us. We said, why? He said, you'll dirty the pool. So he said, well, what do we do? He honestly got a big bucket. And whenever you played in the lawn, you had to jump in the bucket, clean your feet, and then get in the pool. And then when you make a splash, quiet! Because kids aren't meant to have fun. So guess what we never wanted to do? Go visit that oak. Who died miserably of cancer in my bed years later. And I think, now what was that about? My memories of him were not very fond. I love going to a person's house who just says, come on. And I go and I'm nervous. I've got 3 boys who only have an on and an off switch. There's nothing in between. And you go visit someone, their house is so meticulous. And now you're like, oh. And so, oh, please don't touch it. Can you tell your kids not to? I don't go there again. They also don't want us there again. So it's great. But I love going to that place where they say, please, stuff's to be used. My parents are like that. My mother washes the dishes so that the domestic doesn't have to the next day. That's my mom. That's how we grew up. She can't sleep if she doesn't tidy her house. Till today. We went to visit her the other day. She's in her 60s. She needs another few operations. She's not doing well. We get there. We want to go sleep. Shlink in the kitchen. Mom, what are you doing? There's the dishwasher. Right there. I'm just cleaning up, love. I'm thinking, yeah, I know that. I've seen that. If you go for help, no, I'm just cleaning up, love. But can I tell you, in the midst of all that, when the kids run in the house, it's like, let them go. Have your fun. We'll tidy up later. That's liberal. You can work with it. But if you're one who lives in a small picture moment, you can't ever enjoy that kind of life. Tightly wound up all the time. Peter, I think, looks back on a long life well lived and gives this wonderful perspective to us. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. The Message Bible puts it like this. What a God we have, and how fortunate we are to have him, this Father of our Master Jesus. Because Jesus was raised from the dead, we've been given a brand new life, and we have everything to live for, including a future in heaven. And the future starts now. God is keeping careful watch over us and of the future. The day is coming when you will have it all. Life healed and whole. I know how great this makes you feel, even though you've had to put up with every kind of aggravation in the meantime. Pure gold put in the fire comes out of it proved pure. Genuine faith put through this suffering comes out proved genuine. When Jesus wraps all this up, it's your faith, not your gold, that God will have on display as evidence of his victory. You never saw him, yet you love him. You still don't see him, yet you trust him with laughter and singing. Now here's the whole point of the big picture. Because you kept on believing, you'll get what we're looking forward to. Total salvation. Now Peter writes this near the end of his life, is the same young man who, seeing Jesus walking on water, went to him, started to drown, reached out his hand. In that moment, Peter could only see waves, drowning, reaching out his hand. What had Jesus previously spoken over his life? You are Peter, upon you I'll build my church. Peter, I've got plans for you that involve the gospel spreading to the world. So trust me, boy, you're not going to drown right now. There's a bigger picture spoken of your life. When you feel you're drowning, I'm simply teaching you a lesson. Can I say that again? When you feel you're drowning, I am simply teaching you a lesson. And Peter later on speaks to us. That's this whole issue of total salvation. Right near the end of his life in John 16, Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he knows that a little moment is about to come. A little picture moment where they're going to deny knowing him, they're going to run away, they're going to leave him, they're going to get scared. And he wants to remind them to stay close to him. He wants to remind them that in spite of what's just about to happen, God has things worked out. So in John 16, verse 31, Jesus said, "Do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered each to his own home and will leave me alone. Yet I'm not alone, for the Father's with me. I've said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world." In the Message, Jesus said, "Do you finally believe? In fact, you're about to make a run for it, saving your own skins and abandoning me. But I'm not abandoned. The Father is with me. I've told you all this, that trusting me, you will be unshakable and assured, deeply at peace. In this godless world, you will continue to experience difficulties, but take heart, I have conquered the world." What was Jesus saying? In any given moment you and I face, even today, greater is he who's in you, who has conquered the world, and who holds your future in his hands. And the big picture for you is undeniably rosy. If you were somebody who is doing our foundations, you would know that we are talking here about the resurrection of the dead. We're talking about eternal judgment. We're talking about the return of Jesus Christ to bring us into his glory. We, as Christians alone, have every reason to rejoice. We, as Christians alone, welcome the future. We are not scared of the future. Is that all right? Psalm 112, verse 6, "For the righteous need never be moved. He will be remembered forever. He's not afraid of bad news. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. His heart is steadfast. He will not be afraid until he looks in triumph over his adversities." Won't you stand with me, please?